Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Sudan's civil war enters its third year as aid agencies say it has caused the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Ukraine says it struck the base of a Russian missile brigade they believe was behind the deadly attack on Sewy. And the retrial of the disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein begins in New York City. To our top story, Sudan's civil war began exactly 2 years ago today, causing what aid agencies have described as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. A high-level international conference has taken place in London today. One of its hosts, UK's Foreign Secretary David Alami, says its aim was to find a pathway to peace. Here's a reminder of what he said.
Very simply, we have got to persuade the warring parties to protect civilians, to let aid in and across the country, and to put peace first. But the biggest obstacle is not a lack of funding or texts at the United Nations. It's a lack of political will. With over 4 million refugees having fled the country and instability spreading far beyond Sudan's borders, it's also strategically wrong to forget Sudan. And that's why, as Foreign Secretary, I refuse to turn away.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Dubai 92 presenter Jono and Al Arabiya's senior presenter Raiwa Alami. Thank you so much for both joining me. Raiwa, let's just begin with you. The UN has called the situation in Sudan the world's biggest humanitarian crisis. Can you remind us of how many people are affected and exactly how we just got into this situation?
Well, Leigh Ann, it is indeed, as the UN calls it, the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, simply because we're talking about half of the population. They have a 50 million population. Half of those people are facing famine now. Throughout the 2 years of this conflict, 12 million people have been displaced, tens of thousands have been killed. There have been allegations of war crimes by both sides, or by both sides against both sides, committed during those past 2 years. And we are talking about also reports of sexual violence and genocide in Darfur. Now, we got here. Well, the conflict started, or the war started 2 years ago between the Sudanese army and the rapid response forces, after the leaders of both sides basically fell out on, they couldn't disagree on the future, the political future of the country. A lot of fighting, as we said, caused a lot of people being killed, tens of thousands, millions have been displaced, and now half the population is facing famine.
And also, Jono, we just heard there a little bit earlier from the UK Foreign Secretary David Alami. He's been speaking, but what exactly are they promising?
So 12.9 million is the 120 million pounds is the initial give up from the UK government in order to fund some of the humanitarian efforts which are taking place right there now. Now, this is in addition to another 113 million pounds that was given last November. So this is actually the second instalment of funding, but we did not hear much about the first round of funds, so to speak. Now, it does pale in comparison when you take it towards what they've given towards Ukraine, which is in the region of 12.9 billion British pounds. So it is a small amount. But that small amount, unfortunately, is not going to go a very long way. About 600,000 people likely to benefit from this. That's 600,000 people who are currently in desperate need of food, in desperate need of water and medical assistance as well. So that's in the next 3 months that the government of the UK have promised and pledged to help those people. However, it is indeed just a tiny blip in what is required to try and assist the people of Sudan.
If I may add to that as well, that the problem doesn't seem to be just providing the aid to Sudan. It's actually delivering it to the areas that need it the most, because other institutions have been trying to raise funds to send aid to Sudan, yet the problem seems to be that because of the fighting, they're not able to deliver it to where it's most needed. So this is one problem. And probably also, Yeni, if we talk about the London conference that's supposed to also raise a lot of money, the root problem is the actual fighting. That I wonder why all of these international, big forces, they're not trying to solve this problem at the root, which is try to mediate a political solution to this war, rather than just, sending aid or collecting aid where they're not even able to deliver it to where it's needed.
From what we know about it currently, and this is that the RSF and the military from Sudan don't want to go to the table on this situation. Currently, we know that there can be no mediation when there is no compromise between both parties. However, I feel like what perhaps has not happened is that it's been covered up by the fact that there's been so many other things happening that this has been lost out. 13 million people have been displaced, which is very close to the 14 million from Ukraine that have been displaced. However, this has not received the media attention. So
nor the efforts as well to try and solve it.
Nor the efforts. Again, once you can then perhaps when humanitarian effort goes across and starts arriving to the country, then we can have that conversation where we go by to ask the RSF and to ask the military in Sudan if they would come to the table and have a conversation. But right now it's not being given the global stage that it requires in order for that to be the case. Not enough people are paying attention to what's happening in Sudan, and I think that's why 30 million people are displaced. And now we've started to make a small bit of an impact, and I can only hope that maybe perhaps the rest of the world will then listen and that will have a sway to perhaps make some efforts and make some changes. The UK is obviously one of the powerhouses. You would think that they will sit up and listen when the UK starts to speak, but until the US finally intervenes or says something.
Or has the political will to actually do something about this.
And we might be waiting a while. There are bigger fish to fry than there are
absolutely.
for this right now, so I think we'll have to wait a little while for that to happen. But we've just started, and we haven't seen the pictures on TV. We haven't seen what's happening at grassroots level in Sudan, and I think that's where the issue really is stemming from.
Yeah, well, actually, it's really interesting because earlier I did speak to Al Arabiya's geopolitical security analyst, Riyad Kawaji, who told me why Sudan's conflict hasn't been given as much media attention as the other ongoing wars. Take a listen.
It got the attention in the region. If you go to Africa today and talk to African leaders, you will hear them voice the concern about the war in Sudan. However, if you go to the bigger picture, which is the world, the global conflicts today, the center of gravity is still very much in the north, on the western side. So we have a war on the European continent, which is a more powerful, a very rich continent, and it has the Russia and the US both involved. All the big powers are concerned about this conflict, and that's taking a lot of attention away. And of course, when it comes to the Middle East region, what has been happening in Gaza and with the Israeli wars in Lebanon and so forth also took away a lot of attention of what's been happening in Sudan. Unfortunately, we have a lot of conflicts, a lot of military conflicts happening on so many places. The attention will always go first to, the northern part of the world.
So there we are. We just heard from Riyad Kawaji speaking to me a little bit earlier, and I think that's exactly what you both touched on, wasn't it? That the fact that there's so much going on and the world is almost kind of not being the focus point when it comes to something like Sudan. How much sway does America have to get things on the agenda and to get ceasefire talks up and running, do you think, Jono?
I think that they are... Obviously, as we said, the UK and the US hold the cards in this situation. And until they sit up and pay attention, and until at the top level of this, and until the administration listens and says, there is an issue, please let's interject here, then we will be sitting here for a long time looking at the issue in Sudan, and we'll be 2 years further down the line with no further resolution, which of course is the issue. The images are harrowing. To see the images coming from Sudan, they're on par with the rest of the world and what we're seeing taking place right now that are atrocities. There is famine that is taking place there. And until we get someone to listen in the US, I feel like we are going to continue to slam our heads against the wall and not reach the people that need assistance and not get mediation here.
I completely agree with Jono, to be honest with you. It's definitely the US or the UK have a lot of sway, and I think they can exert pressure on both parties to sit at the table and negotiate and probably try and find a peaceful solution to this war. But the question is, are they interested in doing that? I think this is the real question.
Yeah, that's the real question,
Yeah.
and it's getting everybody to agree on mediation and moving forward. But thank you so much for that discussion. Stay right there as we take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines around the world today. US Vice President J.D. Vance has said there's a good chance a trade deal could be reached with the UK. The global stock market has been shaken since Trump announced sweeping tariffs. The unpredictable US trade policy maneuver included a 10% baseline tariff on all imports from the UK, France, and other long-standing trading partners. El Salvador will not return Kilmar Abrigo Garcia. He was deported to his home country by the US government and currently being held in a notorious mega prison. El Salvador's president made the comments during a meeting with Trump at the White House, and that was yesterday. Last week, the US Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration must facilitate the return of Mr. Garcia, who was granted protection from deportation by a court in 2019. According to reports, a second round of nuclear talks between the United States and Iran will be held in Rome. Iran and the US said they held positive and constructive talks in Oman on Saturday and agreed to reconvene this week. However, earlier today, Iran insisted the next round of talks would be held in Oman again. And a sandstorm in Iraq has suspended flights, triggered power outages, and left more than 1,000 people with breathing problems. Footage shared online showed areas cloaked in a thick orange haze. Dust storms are common in Iraq, but some experts believe they're becoming more frequent due to climate change. Now to another story making the news today. And President Trump has blamed Volodymyr Zelensky for starting the war with Russia. His comments come after a massive Russian attack killed 35 people and injured 117 others in Ukraine, with Ukraine striking back at a Russian missile brigade earlier today. The US president said the Ukrainian leader shared the blame along with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Let's take a look.
But that's a war that should have never been allowed to start. And Biden could have stopped it, and Zelensky could have stopped it, and Putin should have never started it. Everybody's to blame. When you start a war, you got to know that you can win the war, right? You don't start a war against somebody that's 20 times your size and then hope that people give you some missiles. You take a look at Putin. I'm not saying anybody's an angel. But I will tell you, I went 4 years and it wasn't even a question. He would never, and I told him, don't do it. You're not going to do it. And it was the apple of his eye, but there was no way that he would have done it.
So, Jono, there we are, Donald Trump, but he called out Zelensky's so-called incompetence. What do you make of that?
So I guess the question is, did he call the previous administration incompetent and then as a result just say that Zelensky was part of the problem with that? And that's the first time I've heard the headline being referred to correctly, because the entire narrative all day has been that Trump has said that Zelensky started the war, which of course, once we've heard there, that's not what he said. What he said is that Biden was in charge, he should have stopped it, Zelensky should have known better, and that Putin shouldn't have started in the first place. So it's actually quite the opposite is what was said by Trump. Did he say he was incompetent? No. What he said was that he went to a sword fight with spoons, loosely giving you the quotation of what he said. So he didn't say that he was incompetent, he just said he bit off more than he could chew, which I don't think there's anyone who would sit down and say that that's not entirely correct. The arsenal and the weaponry that they have in Ukraine does not match close to the powerhouse that is Russia. I think what he said was being cautious to say, I don't want to upset Putin, so I'll put everybody into the same thing and say it was Biden's fault. along with Zelensky, along with Putin, you guys are all to blame. So I don't think he necessarily called him incompetent. I think he questioned the ethics behind the start of the war.
He said actually that you don't pick a fight with someone who's 20 times your size and then ask someone else for help, basically.
Yeah.
Effectively, that's
Yeah,
what he said.
exactly. Ukraine is the Jack Russell of Europe, effectively, in this situation. It went in with German shepherds, and you just think this is not going to benefit anybody in this situation, because you now have ended up in a situation whereby you don't have the arsenal and the weaponry without assistance from the US and the UK and from the UN in order to take on that powerhouse. And I think that that's what the point he was getting at is. What's been taken as the headline is something slightly different.
Yes, it has been. And we know that that is just something that does happen in the media landscape. We can't deny that. But also another thing is, you know, where are we at with all these ceasefire talks, Raiwa? And I just feel like we hear about talking, there's a lot of talking about talking, but are we going to see Donald Trump actually put more pressure on Vladimir Putin? He's touched on it, but he hasn't actually done it.
Okay. I think one thing we should not forget, that ending the war in Ukraine was one of the most important, or the main campaign promises that President Donald Trump did during his campaign. He actually boasted at some points and said that I would finish it in 24 hours. Of course, that didn't happen. But we heard it actually yesterday from his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who said, and I quote, about the ceasefire talks, he said, I think we might be on the verge of something that would be very, very important for the world at large. He said it took a while for us to get to this place, but he said that he saw a deal emerging after 5 hours of talks as well. He's referring to the latest talks because he met with President Putin on Friday. Yeah. And by the way, that was the third talks they held. One of them included the talks on the 18th of February in Saudi Arabia. Now, the Russians said that the contacts with the US were positive and useful. So there is an overall positive vibe to the talks, but no real progress yet. And especially if we talk about what happened on Sunday in Sumy, the deadly attack there, and the US refraining from condemning that attack, we can probably get the gist that the likelihood of the US exerting pressure on Putin is quite small. Well, because they want those talks to stay on track.
Yes, of course, and it's important to Donald Trump also for his Nobel Peace Prize. But earlier I spoke to the Ukrainian MP, Dr. Alexander Mereshko, who told me Putin is not interested in peace and is calling on President Trump to fulfill his promise to Ukraine. Take a listen.
This is exactly what we expect from President Trump, to deliver on his promise, because he said very clearly and distinctly that he's putting forward this ceasefire proposal, and if someone disagrees, if someone rejects this peace proposal, this ceasefire proposal, he will have to deal with serious consequences. Ukraine has agreed absolutely unconditionally both times when this ceasefire was proposed by President Trump. First, full-fledged ceasefire, second time partial ceasefire. We had agreed without any additional demands or any conditions whatsoever. What happened with Russia and with Putin? Both times, these proposals have been rejected by Putin. So we expect Trump to deliver his promise to punish Putin by imposing more sanctions against Russia, by providing more military support for Ukraine.
So I think that was an interesting conversation I had earlier, but Putin has also made it clear that he wants Western sanctions eased if he is to go into a ceasefire proposal. He also wants Ukraine to drop its ambitions to join NATO. There's a whole lot that Putin has put on the table.
He also wants to retain control of the 4 Ukrainian areas that he annexed as well.
And I was speaking
and resizing the Ukrainian military.
Yeah, exactly. I spoke to the Ukrainian MP earlier, and he actually said it's constitutionally impossible to redraw the map. So I don't know, Jono, where do you lie on this?
So I think we're not going to see, and as much as I appreciate the calls for more weaponry to be sent to Ukraine and more funds and more sanctions to be placed on Russia, I don't think we're going to see a situation like that. I think Donald Trump is going to play this very safe and make sure that he's not going to upset the apple cart too much. If you want to have peace talks, the last thing you want to do is to upset Russia in the first place. If you're going to have any success in the ceasefire negotiations, there needs to be a commonality between all parties concerned. I think today, even I'm surprised that he, in the first place, denounced and said, Putin was wrong to go in there. It is a surprising statement from him to say that, because that in itself pins the blame entirely on Russia. I think what we'll see now is a bit of a stalemate, whereby we'll have a couple of weeks, or this may even drag on for months, where we're not entirely sure who's going to make the next move on this. But this tit for tat, back and forth across the border that's happening right now is benefiting nobody, and all it is killing civilians. So until we finally find a middle ground on that, I don't think we're going to have much more of a progression in the next couple of weeks on this.
But that's a reality, isn't it? It's still that civilians are losing their lives. There's troops who are fighting who are also losing their lives. And I think Donald Trump said he wants to end the bloodshed as soon as he can. So maybe, Jono, you're right. He's playing the long game when it comes to this with Putin and Zelensky. But we're going to do a little bit of a gear shift, and we're going to move on to another story. And the jury selection for the retrial of the disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein began in New York City today. It comes 5 years after the film producer was sentenced to 23 years in prison for rape and sexual assault, a sentence that was overturned by an appeals court last year. New York's highest court has ordered a new trial, finding that his original one in 2020 was tainted by improper rulings and prejudicial testimony. Earlier, I caught up with our New York correspondent, Mitch McCann, who gave me some insight into this very case.
Harvey Weinstein is back in court today for the beginning of what is his third trial for sexual crimes, having already been convicted in 2020 here in New York and then 2 years later in California. This is a retrial of the 2020 case and will involve the allegations of 3 different women. Now, Mr. Weinstein is being tried on charges of a first-degree criminal sexual act and a third-degree rape charge based on complaints from a former TV production assistant and a woman described as an aspiring actress. Both women testified in the first trial. However, in this new trial, the third trial, Harvey Weinstein is also charged with sexually assaulting another woman, a third woman, in a Manhattan hotel in 2006. Now, prosecutors say they have known this woman for some time, but she is now ready to come forward. So there will be the 2 women we've heard from in the 2020 trial, and now there'll be a separate charge as well. Jury selection, which began today, it could last 4 days, and opening statements are expected to begin early next week.
So, Raiwa, is there any likelihood that Harvey Weinstein is ever going to be a free man and released?
Well, we're talking about retrials for 2 charges, basically. The retrials that are about to happen. They are regarding 2 sexual charges. The first is sexually assaulting an ex-production assistant, Mimi Haley, in 2006. And the second one is raping former actor Jessica Mann in 2013. Now, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison and was sent to prison in 2022 in Rikers Island prison. He's been there ever since. But there is also a third case. So let's assume that the retrial's verdict was not guilty and the sentence was overturned. Regarding these 2 cases, there's a third case that he was involved in and was convicted in, and that was basically he was found guilty and was sentenced to 16 years in prison, and that was in 2023 when he was found guilty of raping an actor in an LA room in 2013. So according to the sentence, he's supposed to serve these 16 years after he finishes the 23 years sentence. So if the 20 years sentence was overturned, he still has the 16 years to serve. These still stand. If another retrial happens for that case, then that's something else. But we're talking about a man who is 73 years old, who has multiple health problems, including cancer, diabetes, heart problems. So I don't know what are the likelihoods, to be honest, that he will be released anytime soon.
So, Jono, the Harvey Weinstein accusations spawned the hashtag #MeToo movement. Remind us of how that all came into the fore.
So unusually, I think that's what a misconception that exists, that it's Harvey Weinstein first, then the Me Too movement after. And in fact, it was the other way around. Alyssa Milano in 2016 had tweeted this out to say if all the women who'd been sexually harassed or assaulted wrote Me Too as a status, it might give us some sense of the magnitude of the problem. Now, Harvey Weinstein was a 2017 case which followed afterwards. The tweet then gained traction and hashtag #MeToo became the movement. So actually it was Alyssa Milano's tweet first, then the Harvey Weinstein. But what it did is put a spotlight onto the proliferation of this and of how absolutely shocking this behaviour that was taking place is not just in Hollywood, but in many other industries as well. And therefore it gave us a grand scope on this. So it catapulted it into the limelight and gave us what we now know to be probably one of the biggest movements in recent years on a topic that very rightly so deserved to be highlighted and deserved to be focused. At the time, the argument is that now his trial could not have been fair and that the basis of the jury must have been exposed.
And it must have been, very difficult. And I think that's what they're talking about now when it comes to this retrial. How are they going to get a jury that's impartial?
I think it's very hard, to be honest with you, in this case, especially after we're talking about 7 or 8 years have passed, with also taking into account the Me Too movement. His legal team, this is what they're hoping for. They're hoping for a different kind of trial with a different judge, different political climate, and probably a different atmosphere than what ruled at the time with the Me Too movement. Now, how much of that is possible now? Has it all these factors have changed dramatically so that he would get a different verdict? I'm not sure, to be honest.
With jury selection taking place today, I don't know how, and we've seen how jury selection takes place.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can find an unbiased jury.
It's hard.
It's almost impossible.
Of course.
There's no person that either works in our industry or any that doesn't know who Harvey Weinstein is, that doesn't know of the allegations that go before him. And so it's a difficult situation. Is a retrial the right scenario to a man who is at this age 73 in his life and is, as he says himself, and although it may not be mentioned in the trial, is on the verge of death from what we're led to believe, to bring the 3 ladies who've already had to go there and give testimony back to the court once again, it seems very unfair. Although to have justice for the lady who has now brought those claims to the fore is perhaps the win out of this situation, but he's not getting out of prison. The conviction from California will remain regardless, so he's not getting out of prison regardless of the outcome of this retrial.
Well, actually, ahead of today's retrial, I spoke to one of Weinstein's former assistants, Rowena Chu. She famously broke her silence about allegations of attempted rape against her former boss in an article for the New York Times back in 2019, a claim Weinstein does deny. I asked her how she felt about seeing him back in court, and as a hashtag #MeToo activist, what change she wants to see coming ahead in the future.
I would say that I think the wheels of justice grind extremely slowly. When the first verdict came out in 2020, in early 2020, frankly, it was a shock, I think, to many Weinstein survivors. I think many of us never thought we would see the day where Harvey was in court at all, let alone convicted of a crime as serious as rape. And so I think I am grateful that the retrial is able to take place. It is not without huge amounts of pain and trauma and cost. All of the women involved, of course, those that testify are bearing the greatest cost. But the legal system, again, has had to come into the fray because of the legal technicalities that caused the original verdict to be overturned. But I think that the fact that the retrial is happening so many years later is really a testament to the determination of the very many women and the lawyers who've supported them, who spoke out on behalf of the Me Too movement and still continue this day to speak out against injustice.
As a Me Too activist, what do you want to see change in the future? Because obviously I felt the Me Too movement gained a lot of momentum. Harvey Weinstein was at the forefront of that. However, it seems to have slipped back a little bit. Am I right in that analysis?
I would say this. I would say the Me Too movement, when it ignited in 2017, was very much part of the news headlines. But behind the news headlines and behind the media, really the real change was happening in terms of legal reform and policy reform. And I think that all takes time. And I think that the efforts around legal reform and policy reform are ongoing, regardless of whether the Me Too movement is in the headlines, fades from the headlines, or resurges in the headlines, as it has done over the retrial. And so whilst media was obviously deeply important in igniting the movement itself, with the original article in the New York Times and the New Yorker and so on, the media played an instrumental role. I think it is not solely the media that comprises all of the Me Too movement. And so when people say to me, they feel like it has slipped a little, to use your language, it has only slipped a little in terms of media attention. But I think media attention comes and goes. What really matters is the long-term legal reform and policy reform so that we can have laws in place and policies in place to protect the vulnerable and protect women who are vulnerable to sexual assault. And I think that work still continues. It's not glamorous. It doesn't always make the news headlines, but that is where we want real change to take place.
There we are. So that was me speaking to Rowena yesterday, and I think she quite eloquently described exactly why the Me Too movement isn't so much in the focus anymore like it was before, and how these victims have never given up, really.
What I think the Me Too movement did is it's never going away now, if that makes sense. It's now in the human psyche, and it's there permanently. It was such a big movement that it's impossible to ignore it going forward. I think what it's done has been tremendous. What it has done, it has added some level of regulation to an industry that was, unbeknownst to all of us, unregulated. We didn't know what was going on here. We hear the stories, but nobody knew what was actually going on behind closed doors. And I think what it's done is brought it to the fore, so much so that it's impossible now to ignore it.
And given women a voice, really, in many respects.
True, and I mean, they also changed the laws as well regarding in such sexual cases. For example, the law of restitution has been also extended to give women more chance, even after years of being, exposed to such sexual harassment or violations. She would still come up and basically make her case. There's also some reform to the law regarding the NDA, because apparently Harvey Weinstein used that a lot in his, in his life.
Yeah, as a defense
sexual
almost.
encounter.
Yeah, to keep
everyone quiet.
Yeah, and apart from the sort of the legal results or the progress that they've done in this field, also, as you said, it's in the human psyche. I think it kind of shifted the culture of regarding thinking about these issues, and also gave women more confidence to come up and talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's done its job. I think that's what #MeToo set out, and Alyssa Milano probably had no idea that this was going to be the repercussions afterwards. It has done what it set out to do, which was to create awareness for something that otherwise would have been silent, would have been shameful, it would have been unspoken. And now it's no longer that. There's no longer a sense, or so much of a sense, of shame, and it's no longer felt that maybe you won't be listened to if you come forward with these stories. Absolutely. And I think that's the important part of what it was, and it's done that.
And also support for the women who come out and talk about things like this, because obviously they might need some help psychologically or a support network to get through. So those are very good points. But we're now going to go to some other top news headlines that we're looking at today, and we're going to start off with the business news. Nissan will cut Japanese production of its top-selling US model, the Rogue SUV, over May and July. This is the latest global automaker to alter manufacturing plans in response to the new US import tariffs. America is Nissan's top market, accounting for more than a quarter of the vehicles it sold last year, with many of those made in Japan and also in Mexico. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon has sold about $31.5 million worth of the bank shares, according to a regulatory filing. Dimon also offloaded some shares last year in his first such sale since taking over the top role in 2005. JP Morgan is the largest lender in America. Turning to the sports news now, and Newcastle manager Eddie Howe will return to the club when he is 100% ready, according to assistant manager Jason Tindall. Howe was admitted to hospital with pneumonia on Friday and missed his side's 4-1 win against Manchester United on Sunday. He will also miss the next two games against Crystal Palace and Aston Villa. And finally, US Vice President J.D. Vance nearly dropped the College Football National Championship trophy whilst trying to lift it at the White House. Vance didn't appear to realise that the top of the trophy is detachable from its base during a photo op with the Ohio State Buckeyes football team on the South Lawn. The footage that has, of course, gone viral on social media shows Vance dropping the trophy before picking it up again off the ground. Easy mistake there, J.D. Vance. And finally, we've reached that point in the show where Jono and Raiwa, you've come up with a couple of quirky stories for the day. Jono, I want to start with you and tell me all about this. It's about surnames and marriage.
I love this story. So now it turns out that about 30% of young women actually want to take their partner's surname when they marry, which is great. But what's on the other side of this is about a third of men also think they're okay with taking their wife's surname, which is a whole new dimension.
Great.
Right,
Yeah,
which is a new dimension in this.
That's only fair.
However, it does beg the question of who wants tradition over who doesn't want tradition. When they asked people, only 5% of people said, no, the wife should not take her husband's surname going forward. Personally, I think this is a great excuse to get out of a surname that you might not want if you've already been stuck with one your entire life. You might think this is a great reason to change it. Otherwise, it's a great reason to keep your own name if you want to keep the family heritage and tradition going and you actually like your surname. But I know plenty of people who would be more than happy to take a name change, be it for wedding-wise or otherwise, just to get out of what name they have currently.
I think it's a personal choice, to be honest with you. I mean, some people, like in the Middle East, for example, it's quite common, as everywhere else in the world, that the wife would take her husband's surname. But recently, actually, there's, like in the new generation, a lot of them don't.
So what
women don't. But the kids have to take their father's.
So again, and it comes down to the kids. And I said this a while ago. I've got a godson who's got a double-barreled name, and now it's become so long it's almost laughable because it no longer fits on any documents. So I think you end up with this situation whereby what is the best thing for the kids in that situation, and that's to take one name, and be that the mum's name or the dad's name.
It's their choice. It's a family's choice.
It really is a family's choice. What I like about the situation here is that if you have, and as I said, you've been given a name, and I do know people who are called Brian O'Brien, or they're called something. And I think your parents did that in the first place, which was very unfair. This is finally an opportunity to change that by taking your wife's surname when you get married. And I don't see anything wrong with that. I think it's 2025.
Would you do that, Jono?
It really depends on what the name is. Because it does.
It depends on the wife.
No, it depends on the name.
Bias.
I feel like that. This is name. We all have name bias. We know this, right?
Yes,
for
yes,
sure.
True.
We know, like, there's a lot of names out there, and blessed, but some of them I just think, I wouldn't be okay if that was
It's
my.
not posh enough for me. I'm moving up in the world.
Or it's difficult to pronounce, or it's confusing.
Or the worst, it's got a meaning in a different language, and you just think, we can't do this.
I know.
So there is a situation whereby you think, okay, I'm gonna stick with it. But I would have no problem if it was a very cool name. I've always thought the surname Power kind of alludes that it's a cool surname.
Power.
If you were marrying a lady whose surname was Power, I think that Jono Power sounds
We're
amazing.
Let's
go for it.
We're going to hold this against you.
Please
We're going to
do.
check once you get engaged or you have a future. You
I
have
will
a wife.
say one thing. My surname is not going anywhere. Albiya Gerrans. I've always said that. Always said that. It's who I am.
What if your husband said no? What if your husband said, I am a traditionalist, I think you need to change your name? Is that a deal breaker?
I think I would just be like, we can just live together forever.
Actually, to be honest, my husband is watching, and I hope he's not upset if I with what I'm about to say. I didn't even ask him I didn't even.
Oh my God!
Tell him that I'm
We
not
love
taking
your
your name.
husband.
No, he was so nice about it, and yeah.
But
he has his name, I have my name, the kids follow his name, and that's good enough.
It's 2025. Is that a discussion you need to have going into a marriage where you say, I don't know if I need to have
I
this
got
chat?
married a while ago.
It was yesterday. Let's not worry about it. And then, Raiwa, what about your story? It's about something called a polar bear dip, but it's got nothing to do with polar bears, right?
Actually, we're talking about 2,461 bathers. They were very brave to jump into the second largest lake in the Czech Republic in order to break a previous Guinness World Record. Now, and they did actually break it. We're talking about waters that are about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is less than 10 Celsius. So it is quite cold.
Very cold.
Yes, and they managed to actually break the Guinness World Record. The previous one was in 2015, when 1,799 cold weather swimmers took the plunge in the 8th, I think, Ice Swimmers Convention in Poland. Ooh. I don't know. I don't do very well with cold water.
I just don't know why.
I don't know why
you do it to yourself. It's just awful. A cold shower is probably as much as I could push it for, and even that is a tricky one.
The thing is, I mean, they say it's really healthy. Don't they say it's really healthy to do these cold dips? And
they say it's invigorating, and I think there has been like a bit of a social media trend about doing the cold plunges, ice plunges, haven't they? They were like a really big thing because apparently they bring up inflammation in the body, and if you're exercising lots, it helps with that. But I just wanted to ask Jono, only because he's told me this before, you've tried to get some world records into, what's the story?
I've tried but failed. So it's been one of those...
At least you tried.
At least I tried, but failed miserably. It's been one of those things when you say there's lifelong ambitions, and one of them is to be able to get a Guinness World Record. But the easiest ones to break are the ones for eating challenges, and they always sound surprisingly easy, like eat 8 saltines in 1 minute, eat 7 Ferrero Rochers in 1 minute. And that all sounds very doable, right? Until you try it. It's impossible.
7 Ferrero Rochers? That's not hard.
I know, right?
Are they quite dry?
It's just, you can't use water. You have to just try and...
Oh, okay.
It's next to impossible. It's next to impossible.
It's messy.
And so any of those, and it's the saltines one, don't even put yourself through it. It's absolute torture. I prefer to jump into the cold water. Thank you very much.
I have a better chance of survival.
I've got a better chance of getting the record. So I've tried but failed. I think I've tried 4 different attempts, and every one of them has been a fail.
The next attempt, I'll try it with you, as long as it doesn't involve eggs.
Raw eggs,
raw eggs I can't deal with, but as long as it's something like... I saw one that you could run 100 metres in high heels. I thought that would be quite fun.
Seriously,
I was thinking 100 metres is Usain Bolt's record, and I don't know if that's one you want to take on. In high heels seems doable.
But, I think I'm good. I don't need to break. I don't need to break any records. I'm good.
Because the issue is, you have the record for a very limited time. Because as soon as you do one that's quite easy to break,
everybody would try to break.
Somebody comes in and snaps that record off you. So you got to pick something that's going to have some longevity. So it's a work.
It's going to be really hard.
Yeah.
It's a long project. It's a long task.
Yeah, but I love that story too. And the Guinness World Records has always fascinated me. The books have always got fascinating pictures. So thank you for both of those stories. And thanks to today's guests, of course, Dubai 92 presenter Jono Hayes and Al Arabiya's senior presenter Raiwa Alami. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Sudan's civil war enters its 3rd year as aid agencies say it has caused the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Ukraine says it struck the base of a Russian missile brigade they believe was behind the deadly attack on Sewy. And the retrial of the disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein begins in New York City. And that's all from us on W News. GNT with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next, followed by The Dressing Room. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.